Where words fail, music speaks, a form of magic that warmed our hearts before fire and most likely developed alongside our earliest forms of language because music is not a human invention. It's a universal standard as there's a rhythm and melody to all of life. Even the forests and oceans have a song. And so if the whole world can be connected with music, then the most powerful influence one can have is to be able to make the whole world dance. And so jumping right into the context of why you're here, I have a few One Piece theories connecting back to music mainly because our main character's ultimate power revolves around the drums of liberation, something that should be understood as a major clue for the possible direction for the end of the One Piece series, especially if you want to entertain the idea that I pushed at the end of 2022 regarding Imu possibly having parallel imagination powers relating to painting rather than music. Given how specific Oda has been with his musical choices, some of these songs invoking innate reactions from us viewers, moving towards a direction where the most recent movie thematic encompassed the enchanting power that music has over the world, and tying back to how nearly every arc ends with a banquet and music. It seems like villains and heroes may disagree on their life choices, but fall back on a common desire to enjoy their journey with a few moments of joy and music. And I'll be transparent here with what this video is meant to be. I have several theories in the future that are planned that will be amplified by the message in this video, which is why I'm starting off with this one. This video will serve to connect you to what I think might be a strong inspiration for Oda's creation in Joyboy, what the original Joyboy might have been like, and it might even extend into what Imu's appearance might be reminiscent of. And so if you're new to the channel, the way I view the world is by making connections. So let me connect you to my vision, the Parvision. Alright, honestly, if you knew the full scope of what I want to discuss, then you'd know how hard it is to parse through and segment this discussion. But I think highlighting a major detail that should be more than apparent by now is that Oda loves making references to pop culture. I mean, all the admirals and admiral candidates are references to famous Japanese actors and actresses. Usopp's design here is a reference to Kiss. Sanji's design is Steve Buscemi from Reservoir Dogs. Egghead is literally littered with video game references that I could spend eons highlighting, but I'm sure you can each pick one thing out from here that you recognize. And my point is, Oda somehow finds a way to make references to this and mythology and historical events, all while integrating it into a shonen anime that ends up providing so many dynamic plot points that some arcs could end up feeling more slice of life or even straight up comedies. And so what I want to propose to you is the possibility that Oda might have overlaid the entire story to a major pop culture reference that swept the world that parallels the One Piece world. Some of you may know what the thumbnail of this video is referencing, but many of you are younger like myself and probably missed the initial wave of this mania that Oda is probably much more influenced by. So instead of looking at this video as a full-blown theory, view it as me establishing connections that will make this inspiration extremely apparent. I'm posting this video first in a series of 3 videos, and I will reference this video a few times in the future videos. But to cut to the chase, I think the major inspiration for the Will of D, but more importantly Joyboy, lies within the Beatles. I might have immediately lost a lot of you, but give me a few minutes. Again, this is not a theory. Oda 100% has connected One Piece to the Beatles, and I'll explain that one in a second, but here's a lackluster explanation of the Beatles, and I say that because I will admit that I missed this cultural phenomenon, but that's mainly because I was hidden away from the world for a lot of my life, a story for another time. But yes, this band that reached international stardom in the 60s and had a strong but relatively brief run that fizzled out in the 70s, but by 2017, they held the record for the most #1 hits on Billboard Hot 100 and accumulated so many accolades in between, even being knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. As of 2012, they were the best-selling band in history, and we'll be highlighting them plenty in this video, but before that, let me fast forward real quick to prove why One Piece is 100% connected to the Beatles. So if you didn't know, there was a filler arc called Little East Blue starting in episode 426 and ending in 429. To summarize this filler, it took place on some random island in the Grand Line that contained settlers of East Blue that recreated all major components of the East Blue, but they highlighted all of the East Blue Straw Hats kind of like they were mega fans of the crew. And this filler was actually something that served as an intro to Strong World, and given in Strong World Shiki was planning on invading the East Blue, in this filler he commissioned a pirate crew that was looking to ally with Shiki to invade Little East Blue, specifically for a beetle. Yes, a beetle. This beetle was called Boss and was apparently the only creation that escaped from Dr. Indigo, which if you don't know what that means, check out my Strong World Theory video that was basically confirmed by the end of Wano, or watch the movie. But anyways, this beetle had giant pincers, was able to fight Luffy, could breathe fire, and most importantly, it could continuously evolve as it went through the molting process, which is based in reality to a certain extent, but amplified by the IQ plant that was debuted in the movie but had so many parallels to devil fruits to the point that each plant was synthesized by two clown scientists that share the same voice actor. But back on topic, you're probably like, Par, that's just a beetle, besides a loose name scheme that has nothing to do with the Beatles. But that's not why this is connected to the Beatles. It's because this beetle had a companion named Yoko, and for anyone that knows the Beatles knows why this is significant. See, the real band ended up connecting to another musician later in their career, a Japanese artist by Yoko Ono. This name carried a lot of significance for Asia and Japan and internationally, and it sparked a lot of unnecessary controversy, which depending on your geographic location, it would completely alter your perspective of her for the most part, and we'll get into that much later. But yes, because this beetle in this filler was friends with Yoko, I believe Oda was very intentional with this connection for several reasons. Whether it's filler, movies he's a part of, live plays, live actions, anything really, Oda does the designs for characters, and this one would most likely be filler that Oda designed because if you remember from my Strong World video, that this movie was the first movie Oda signed on as an executive director. He was at the helm of everything, writing 2 movies actually. The first one was something he never released, but the movie we got was what he landed on, and he went as far as designing every aspect of this movie. And a lot of the elements of the movie, though not canon in its entirety, did have things that were reflected on in the manga. For example, if you didn't know, Shiki's design was originally meant for Kuma, but the decisions he made in this movie were things that shaped One Piece, and I would imagine that the intro anime filler that prefaced the movie also contained elements that Oda specifically designed, especially Yoko. The reason why Yoko stands out is that not only is the name the same, but in Japanese you can spell the same name multiple ways depending on the kanji you attach to it, which results to a meaning of small child of the ocean. And so hold on to that info. But Yoko in the episodes basically played a role synonymous to Nami, where her parents were killed by pirates and that resulted in Yoko hating pirates, but being reformed by the Straw Hats in their endeavors to protect the island's citizens and most importantly her beloved friend, the Beetle. And if you want to put any stock into this, the Beetle was actually one of the few characters in all of One Piece that received a personal invitation from Luffy to join the crew. And again, I imagine that this is something Oda wrote out considering how personally tied he was to the creation of Strong World. As an example for Film Red, Oda wrote a 17-page guide on what the plot and contents would be, and the episodes that prefaced the movie basically followed Oda's direction, and so though these weren't directly credited to Oda for screenplay or direction, I think it's reasonable to assume that Oda definitely heavily guided these episodes, and I wouldn't be surprised that he did this for the first movie he was executive producer of. All that being said, before I start giving you the context of why the Beatles' connections to One Piece is important, I want to tell you all of the crazy coincidental connections that exist between the two global phenomenon before I start roughly contextualizing it for you within the story itself. So now that we established that Oda definitely had the Beatles in mind for the movie Strong World, let's also briefly acknowledge that both the prototype movie that Oda scrapped and Strong World was centralized around Nami, and in Strong World she had to sacrifice her participation on the crew for the world that protected her. Believing she was saving both groups, she accepted a role on Shiki's crew that she was reluctant about fulfilling, but was also perfect for. And again, I promise I'll touch back on this at the end of the video. So let's take a step back and recognize the song connections to One Piece. For one, that a lot of people probably already think of is the loose connection of the famous song Yellow Submarine and Law's ship being a yellow submarine. And we'll get into more lyrics later, but just to establish the depth that most of these will reach, the opening starts out with, "In the town where I was born lived a man who sailed to sea. He told us of his life in the land of submarines. So we sailed onto the sun till we found a sea of green, and we lived beneath the waves in our yellow submarine." And I won't insult your intelligence to explain how that obviously sounds very similar to Luffy and Shanks in a way, and so we'll deep dive that one later, but an important note was that this was a song that was seen as a signature of a particular bandmate, but was written by another, and I'm being cryptic for suspense, but trust me, it's worth listening to this. Let's back things up from Yellow Submarine, because what if I told you that the Beatles had songs titled Sun King and Here Comes the Sun? For some reason, they had a huge draw towards the sun, but it makes sense because the Beatles' influence on the world is that they warmed it with music. In fact, a quote that probably was never said but was still attributed to bandmate George Harrison was that the Beatles saved the world from boredom. And to embody that even further, look at the lyrics from Here Comes the Sun. Little darling, it's been a long, cold, lonely winter. It feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun. Skipping ahead a little bit, the smiles returning to their faces, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun, and skipping some more, I feel that ice is slowly melting. It seems like years since it's been clear. And let's pair that with Sun King's lyrics that simply goes, here comes the Sun King, everybody's laughing, everybody's happy, here comes the Sun King. And again, I won't insult your intelligence, but you can see how very close to the plot these lyrics are. Luffy embodying Sun God Nika, whose primary power is bringing smiles to faces, warming up hearts from a cold world, making everyone laugh and bringing happiness to all touched by the sun. And I mean, sure, the sun is attributed to happiness in so many songs, cultures, and mythologies, but if this is where all the connections stop, then we wouldn't be here. Because if there was something symbolizing One Piece, it's all encompassed in Luffy, right? And his power, whether it be Nika or the Gomu Gomu, it still can be said to be a rubbery power, and a mythical Zoan is definitely some kind of soul of some sort, and the album that can be considered a breakthrough for the Beatles was called none other than Rubber Soul. And that name was an Oda classic in the sense that it was an album title that held a lot of meaning. It was primarily a twist on the phrase plastic soul, which was an insult on artists essentially who had fake manufactured soul music, and so the band took that and twisted it to Rubber Soul. I'm assuming due to the bouncy nature of rubber and adaptability, but also it was rubber soul like the bottom of a shoe, and also some interpreted it as Rub Her Soul, which this album did end up having several songs centralized around a romance, especially the song called Girl that ended up embodying John Lennon's future wife, Yoko Ono. And so yeah, I could go on and on about so many of the various song references that could relate directly to One Piece. But outside of that, there were other connections, like how though wildly successful and influential, the four Beatles were just four boys at heart. They ended up splitting the stresses of stardom together, something their predecessors like Elvis could not do. But through it all, they maintained a childlike behavior while in the Beatles. Or I could point out that they do have an image of all of them wearing straw hats, the ones that look very similar to the one that Luffy wears. Or that maybe the four boys and Yoko Ono could be the equivalent of the East Blue Straw Hat Crew. We'll talk about that one later, but I think a direction we should look back at is the musical connection in One Piece. Do you remember what is one of Sun God Nika's signature attributes? It's the drums of liberation. For some reason, Nika is associated with drumming, so maybe we should take a closer look at the Beatles drummer, Sir Richard Starr. Yeah, that's right, Starr. Not too far off from Monkey. But the best part is the characterization of this man. See, of the band, Starr was the one who is always attributed to being one of the most free-spirited and fun. Of all descriptions I read about him, he seemed pretty synonymous with Luffy. But remember the song The Yellow Submarine that was supposed to embody a bandmate? It was for the drummer, going out to sea and being inspired by a sailor of sorts. Yup, that was about Starr. Another song that was actually written by Sir Richard was Octopus's Garden, where it starts out saying, I'd like to be under the sea in Octopus's garden in the shade. So much of this song is related to the ocean and sea, but from what I've seen, a lot of his music mentions the ocean and sea. But also, he was a super one-track minded human being. Basically, he always wanted to be a drummer from a young age and having no other dream. I would imagine if he were more like Luffy, he'd proclaim that he'd become the king of the drums. And the thing is, just like Luffy, who inspires others to become pirates, so many famous drummers after the era of the Beatles ended up attributing their inspiration to this man. And just like Luffy, who says he needs help from his friends because he can't do everything on his own, Sir Richard Starr wrote a song called With a Little Help from My Friends, where it goes, what would you think if I sang out of tune? Would you stand up and walk out on me? Lend me your ears and I'll sing you a song, and I'll try not to sing it out of key. And it reminds me of Luffy's Baka song. But now for the people that know the Beatles or are wondering why I'm calling him Sir Richard Starkey. Yes, I have been bamboozling you because this was his birth name that he later changed to Ringo Starr. Yes, in Japanese it would be Apple Star, but this was most likely not intentional, at least from a public standpoint, because he named himself this against his parents' wishes because he wore a lot of rings and became known for them, which I want to say is such a Luffy thing to do. And so while I keep bringing up parallels to Luffy, I don't think Luffy is supposed to be Ringo Starr. I think Nika is supposed to be Ringo Starr. I think the drums of liberation are going to end up being something reminiscent of the Beatles. It might be that the original story of Joyboy and Nika, whichever combination of the two, will end up playing out the story of the Beatles. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up getting an image resembling the Sgt. Pepper album cover where the four Beatles dressed up as pirates, but it's for a larger reason. See, as far as music goes, it would be hard for anyone, especially involved in the craft, to dismiss that the Beatles revolutionized rock and roll and music in general. They were seen as a youthful rebellion that ended up reaching all corners of the world, creating the phenomenon called Beatlemania. It sounds crazy, and I will quote some testaments to what it meant, because something people have to recognize is that the Beatles did this all without the virality that is the internet. This group was so influential and truly created madness all over the world that they actually at a certain point in their career hid away from the world, stopping their live performances and only doing studio recordings, basically focusing on their craft after taking the world by storm, if that sounds familiar. But here is a feat that no other can claim. The Beatles were the stars of the first global satellite television production called Our World, which, if you now sit back and think about the influence that Joyboy and the Ancient Kingdom had, it sounds kind of similar to this. If the world government was fearful of the power of music, it would explain the apprehensiveness towards Uta in Film Red, but also why even in the canon story they criminalize literal band groups like the Rumbar Pirates. If Joyboy created his own version of Beatlemania, then it would make sense, and you'll see how crazy this can get once I read some of these quotes. So here we go. Beatlemania was the fanaticism surrounding the English rock band the Beatles in the 1960s. Commentators liken the intensity of this adulation to religious fervor, and among the display of deity-like worship, fans would approach the band in the belief that they possess supernatural healing powers. Mick Jagger, another legend, stated the Beatles were so big that it's hard for people not alive at the time to realize just how big they were. There isn't a real comparison with anyone. To quantify this a little bit, according to Life, the Beatles were a multinational corporation expected to gross $100 million in 1965, which with inflation is more than $900 million in today's dollars. Their fandom reached all worlds, including Cassius Clay, who before he became heavyweight champion of the world, made a proclamation against his opponent Sonny Liston, and said when Sonny Liston picks up the papers and sees that the Beatles came to see me, he will get angry and I will knock him out in 3. Though it took 6 rounds, their stardom was then tied together, and Cassius Clay became Muhammad Ali, the legendary boxer we know. And even physicist Stephen Hawking, when asked why the Beatles were the big bang that created much of modern youth culture, he said, "For me and many others, the Beatles came as a welcome breath of fresh air." And for him specifically, I want to read a direct quote from this excerpt I got from the Life magazine about the Beatles, which at the end of the video, I want to show you something crazy, kind of as a behind the scenes as how my life works. But so the article goes on to say, the physicists knew that a collapsing star creates a black hole, and while there were no greater stars than the Beatles, their collapse didn't leave a void from which no light can escape. The Beatles defied physics and remained luminous. John Lennon sang it 5 years after the Beatles broke up. "We all shine on like the moon and the stars and the sun. On and on, on and on." And so it's clear that the Beatles reached a stardom that many could never. Their very existence birthed so much after, and at the core, they were a group that had influence beyond political borders. They carried so much power despite just being musicians. They themselves thought it was weird. Their presence overshadowed royal royals, diplomats, world leaders, and even police. The way fans were at Brooks' concert in Return to Sabaody was much like how the Beatles fandom was. Ringo Starr specifically noted that it was strange how in-depth fans were about songs that to them weren't that deep. This madness that they created ended up antagonizing many, as there came a time when there were riots because John Lennon said that they were more popular than Jesus. Specifically, he said Christianity will go, it will vanish and shrink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right and I will be proved right. We're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity. Jesus was alright, but his disciples were thick and ordinary. And that sounds like the machinations of a deluded man, but no, it was validated by the fact that crippled people were constantly being brought backstage at concerts to be touched by a Beatle. And that's where it starts to get interesting with the One Piece stuff. All of a sudden, you have a group that is running counter to God, claiming a place where God should have influence. How do you stop this from spreading? You have to take them out and erase everything that the Beatles did? And then what? Prevent music and trade? Because at the end of the day, music is a part of life. Eventually the desire for it will return. And so then to contextualize all of this, it would be that the original Joyboy will probably end up reminding us of Ringo Starr in some ways, either thematically or narratively or just directly. His group will mirror the Beatles, and after coming together they will meet a female crewmate and inevitably fall apart, with the remnants trying to push forward their legacy separate and disjointed. And the start of the journey or group might remind us a lot of the original East Blue Gang, 4 boys and Nami, where Nami's role in Strong World might give us an inkling towards Emu's role in Joyboy's story, a tragic sacrifice that needed to be upheld to protect the world. See, the other aspect to tie into all of this was if you start thinking about Yoko, Nami, and possibly Emu, in that the role that they seemed to play was the catalyst towards some kind of greater power. In Yoko's case, by attacking her and capturing her friend Boss, you now get an endlessly evolving fire-breathing monster beetle. In Strong World, in Nami's case, if you remember in Chapter 0, Shiki was looking for the ancient weapon, and many people, including myself, theorized that the one he had been privy to was Uranus, and then by the end of the chapter he goes on a 20-year planned hiatus, and I wonder if it makes sense that he completely omitted the desire for an ancient weapon during his planning process. But then we see during the movie that the thing that caught his eye the most was Nami. He had so many things in play, but the moment he witnessed Nami's observational skills, he created his own demise by making himself the target of the Straw Hat crew. But at first, Nami gave herself up, sacrificed herself. She thought if she adhered to Shiki's demand, she would save East Blue and the Straw Hats, and what we also end up seeing is Nami ends up pairing with a duck with lightning powers, kind of similar to Boss, the beetle with fire powers. And all of that brings me to Emu. Considering the pattern from Yoko to Nami in the story of Strong World, I think it makes a lot of sense to consider this could apply to Emu, and Emu sacrificed themselves for the sake of their friends, and is connected to some insane level of power, most likely being Uranus, which a lot of people already speculated. And if you're wondering why at the end of the video I'm connecting you to a dot that you've already seen or heard or theorized, it's because I think the lens of which I got here is valuable. The framing of the inspiration for One Piece using the Beatles I think will play out in a much bigger way than we could have ever realized. If Roger was the one who started the golden age of pirating, then Joyboy is the one who started the age of pirating. Without the message from Lily along with the poneglyphs and the power and influence that Joyboy had, it might be that we see a really crazy alternate reality for the Beatles play out. And like I said at the start of the video, this entire dialogue isn't meant to be a standalone theory. The next theory or two will heavily refer back to this one and use this as a reference. So I don't expect this video to be one of your favorites, but the entire reason for making this video will be much better understood after seeing the next one, because the fact that it all connects and Oda would have connected these terms and references together is honestly so childlike but also magnificent, and I can't wait to share more of it with you. These 4 boys were replacing centuries-old traditions in the youth, basically destabilizing a foundational belief system. When basically most of the Western civilization was rooted in Christianity, to have a group saying things like this brought them so much hatred. They were targeted by riots and extremists in the Philippines, the United States, and also Japan. Literally, the KKK was targeting the Beatles, but nothing could really stop their continued success. At one point, the four of them considered buying a Greek island, and Life magazine says that was an uncharacteristic act of cartoon rock star decadence that didn't come to pass, but might have served as an early sign of the decline and fall of the Beatles empire. That line to me was such an interesting interpretation of what the Beatles were. From everything I read about them, they really did seem like cartoon characters to a certain extent. And so anyways, this tidbit of knowledge got me curious, and I feel like this island could be important. If I'm correct, maybe Laugh-Tale was supposed to be relative to this island, and so apparently the island they wanted to buy was called Agia Triada, and something significant about it is that it's shaped like a guitar. Apparently it means Holy Trinity and is right next door to Pezzonisi, the island of dreams. But as far as connections go, there are two more things that I want to talk about along these lines, and it's that we know how important fruits are to One Piece, but as I mentioned in my Blackbeard video, we can confirm that apples are a guaranteed way to transfer devil fruit powers, and can be seen as one of the best ways to transfer or receive information as demonstrated by Caesar and Vegapunk. But the Beatles also started a record company that looked like this, called Apple Records. And I have had a theory in the past about how because we know there's a punk record in our current timeline, there must have been a previous record that existed, and I called it Joyboy Records, but maybe it's Sun Records, or something like Apple Records. Oda would probably have to twist it to avoid copyright, but that was an interesting connection that also leads to a weirder one that I was like, whoa about. And it was apparently the Beatles got scammed, specifically John Lennon and Paul McCartney. They had a lot of money and got drained by a Greek man named Magic Alex, who was attempting to create a wallpaper that also acted as a high fidelity speaker. And that sounds like crazy cool technology, but also kind of reminds me a little bit like either dials or poneglyphs that have spoken before and told tales, maybe a little bit like the voice of all things. And so switching gears real quick, and as far as references go, we know that Oda references many mythologies rooted in the Indian subcontinent, especially since a few core ones like Hinduism and Buddhism are reflected in Japan. And that's an interesting thing for the Beatles because they shared an interesting relationship to India as they lived there for 5 years, incorporating Hindu philosophy into their music, but also adopting a mantra, Jai Guru Deva Om, into their song Across the Universe, and the phrase literally translates to glory to the shining remover of darkness, and is seen as a way to be grateful to the source of knowledge and truth that we freely obtain from a source outside of ourselves. And so by now, you can probably see the very strong association to One Piece that exists within the Beatles as far as an inspiration goes. I want to connect this back to Japan, and there's so much that could be said in that the nation of the rising sun was apprehensive of the Beatles, but after giving them a chance, they warmed up to the point by the end of their stay, news broadcasts said that they were as powerful as the natural cyclones, saying that the Beatles' typhoon swept the youth of Japan off their feet, the power of which still has a grip on pop culture in Japan to this day. There were a lot of factors involved with this, but there seemed to be some natural connection as Yoko Ono became very close to the Beatles to the point of marrying and creating a controversy with John Lennon. Now, I want to take a moment to say I'm not a Beatles historian, and most of what I said is surface level connections that I made. And so I'm sure you all could add much more depth, and I'd love to see if you have more to add, especially on the Yoko Ono aspect of the story, as I believe it will relate to Emu. See, the thing about Yoko Ono was that she was basically attributed globally for the breakup of the Beatles, and while there were aspects of infidelity that could be speculated with John Lennon and his first wife that Yoko Ono drove a wedge into, but in hindsight, none of the Beatles ever blamed Yoko for the split. But this role she had in the public eye made her the target for a lot of hate worldwide, and gained a poor reputation for Asian women in general. But this didn't stop Yoko for continuing the message of peace that the Beatles stood for, and John Lennon did as well, especially after John Lennon was murdered, which is a whole nother story. And something that is probably one of Yoko Ono's greatest legacy is that since 1996, she started the Wish Tree Project, where her instructions are, make a wish, write it down on a piece of paper, fold it, and tie it to a branch of a wish tree. Ask your friends to do the same. Keep wishing until the branches are covered with wishes. So I wonder if this is yet another reason to tie Yoko Ono to Emu or the story in general. Maybe this is how the Devil Fruit Tree functions, whether it's related to the Apple Records idea or the Wish Tree Project. Which brings me to a famous quote attributed to Yoko Ono, which goes, "A dream you dream alone is only a dream. A dream you dream together is reality, which feels like a mantra perpetuated by the One Piece story from Luffy's journey or even just the creation of devil fruits itself. From chapter 1069, the line, "As long as people wish for Nika, his existence will truly never disappear. All things are brought into this world with hope. Yes, even the devil fruits." The wish tree that Yoko Ono desires to spread across the globe were inspired by her childhood in Japan, where she saw trees in temple courtyards always filled with people's wish knots, which look like white flowers blossoming from afar. And the crazy thing is, all fruits come from flowers. Fruits are essentially the ovaries of a flowering plant that don't typically blossom and contain seeds. So is it possible that maybe the devil fruits are wishes that people had that never blossomed and ripened into fruits? Which makes us look at One Piece with a botanical lens, and maybe there is a glaring truth within that realization that we have overlooked since the beginning of One Piece, but I will cover that in the next video. Backing up to Yoko real quick, given her quote about dreams, I instantly was reminded of a parallel line that Nami had when speaking to Enel, a line that, if you're knowledgeable about the murder of John Lennon, sounds crazy to put in context here, but we see Enel say, "Be happy you survived and forget those who are no longer with us. You too must desire a future for yourself." Nami goes, "A future I desire? Yes, I have one. But if I go along with you, I might as well be completely alone. What's the fun of getting everything you desire if you're all by yourself?" And that line makes you wonder even more so about Emu. Is there a possible parallel here? Does Emu have everything while being completely alone? Is there a symbol in the straw hat that makes Emu reminiscent of the past Joyboy and explain why they would hold on to an enemy's memories? If you remember, Luffy's foundation for most of what he does is because he hates being alone. He basically says being alone is more painful than being killed, which is an almost one-to-one to another Yoko Ono quote. A lot of us think there is a connection between Emu and Joyboy, and surprisingly, though Yoko Ono was married to John Lennon, she said no one is gonna believe it, but Ringo Starr was the most influential Beatle. He was the embodiment of peace and love. So there might even be a sort of respect that Emu has for the original Joyboy that no one else has proved for themselves of having in the last 800 years. And when that Joyboy comes, they will put smiles on the faces of people and warm everyone's hearts like the sun, healing them and inspiring them, liberating them from a boring life, just like the beats of the drummer of the Beatles, Ringo Starr. And so if you enjoyed this video, share it, like it, and consider subscribing, because I guarantee that the next few videos will be absolutely mind-blowing. And I hope this video was thought-provoking and eye-opening at the minimum. I think it almost makes too much sense that since Oda left us with so many musical data points in the story, that there will be a major musical reference overlaying at least the last saga, if not the Void Century. That being said, I do want to tease you for the next video and give you something to think about. Remember what I said about fruits and how important that cycle is? Well then, why is the human fruit a mushroom? Maybe Nami said something again that spoils the ending of One Piece in that regard. And so hopefully next time you connect with me, because I will be showing a new dawn for the story. And before I end, check out this short video real quick. So I told my wife my entire theory that will carry on in the next few videos. She was mind blown by the theory, but was baffled by this. When I went out to go grocery shopping, I found the Life magazine for the Beatles right next to a National Geographic magazine for pirates. And because of my theory, this looked like an insane sign, because what a crazy coincidence. And something else happened that I posted on my new thread account, where I was literally visited by the topic of the next video in my house, and it was terrifying. And so, like always, thank you for connecting with me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you all on the next Parvision.